But joining us now is Caleb Sailors. He's a multimedia journalist with Super Talk Mississippi News. All right, Caleb.
I was enjoying Sir Duke by Stevie Wonder much more than our little Chiron. By the way, excellent song choice, Rhino. That's a good one. One of the classics. I love Stevie Wonder.
So, Caleb, you were present at the Neshoba County Fair among those of us with the Super Talk Mississippi team.
About to say, you would know. You got to see a lot of me these past few days. Probably the most you've seen me ever.
Right. All right. So, what stood out to you?
I mean, I don't know. We've got really heated races for auditor. No, obviously the lieutenant governor's races and the governor's races were the most heated amongst all of them. And what really stood out to me more so than anything, I'll first start with the lieutenant governor's election.
Okay.
I was not expecting Delbert Hosemann to come out, not like fighting back, but like fighting, going on the attack against Chris McDaniel. I did not expect to see that at all. And that stood out to me how he wasn't counterpunching. He was punching Senator McDaniel, attacking the senator's record in the chamber and attacking him in a leadership position, and then going on to cite voting records saying that Senator McDaniel, who's championed himself as the conservative, as the consistent conservative candidate, well, he may or may not have supported Ronnie Musgrove in 2003. And so I was not expecting to see that from Hosemann. Of course, McDaniel did his thing. Delbert, the Democrat, accused Delbert of pandering and catering to more moderate or more quote-unquote liberal members of Mississippi. But I expected there to be some mudslinging there. I just didn't anticipate the lieutenant governor to come out the way he did.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I will say that in the interview with Senator McDaniel on middays, he really did not condemn the lieutenant governor. He didn't sling any mud at him. I didn't hear any of that sort of accusatory rhetoric. And so I appreciate that. He stuck to the issues, and he spoke more generically. He said, we've got to stand in the gap. That's a typical refrain he uses. And that we are Republicans, and we got to act like and govern as Republicans, is what he said. So we had a chance to get into the issues and stay away from the attacks, and the same with the lieutenant governor. He didn't do that either. But you're right. In his speech, maybe the first time, arguably, since the race has been on, that he's kind of come out and made some sort of verbal assaults on Senator McDaniel.
Well, and if you go back and look at our reporting on it at supertalk.fm, I was basically alluded to the lieutenant governor strapped on the boxing gloves and prepared for a match. I mean, he didn't pull any punches, but it was good though that they had their speeches at the stump and then got to talk to you afterwards. And, because the speeches, you're going to try to get the crowd going. But when they come and talk to you, you can actually get into the policies.
Yeah.
And so it was nice to have that balance there. And, of course, I would go listen to them talking on your show as well and try to ask some questions myself afterward. But you're right. It was good to hear them actually go into policy matters and hear their discrepancies on tax policy. Chris McDaniel has accused the lieutenant governor of standing against or standing in the way of tax cuts, whether it be the income tax or the grocery tax. And then the lieutenant governor accused the senator of being a hypocrite, saying, well, he's opposed all local and private taxes that we've produced or proposed in the Senate. And so you got both of them going at each other that way. And it was good to see both of them, elaborating on their policies, elaborating on their platforms on your show. But it was also, I don't know, it was just interesting to see the lieutenant governor fighting the way he did. You haven't seen that he had a little rant on social media, but he had not really gone out publicly like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And of course, these candidates in their social media, not really sure, honestly, behind the scenes. Even elected officials, know that from being in the news business. Yeah. Often those are controlled by their surrogates or by workers on their staff, and that's fine because they can't possibly do all that. No. The exception may be Donald Trump, who lived on Twitter.
Yes.
Right? And you could tell, that's Donald Trump.
You see all caps and exclamation points. Yeah, that's the former president speaking.
So I was just glad that when they came on the program that both of those candidates sort of stayed away from attacking the other. Now, there was a little bit of an altercation, I think we ought to point out, that occurred right after the lieutenant governor spoke. And if you're not familiar with the pavilion at Founders Square at the Neshoba County Fair, it is a building that I would say was rectangular shape, fixed seating for the audience. Probably 20, 25 rows, almost set up like a church. Honestly.
I was going to say like an old chapel.
Like a church, yeah, and has like a foot high stage across the entire length in the front with a podium right in the middle, and that's it. That's all that's on the stage, and then a plywood wall behind it, and there's a single door that is directly behind the podium.
It's an open door too.
It's open. There's no door.
Yeah,
it's just a hole, if you will. So there's a door frame. And typically what happens is to just avoid any awkwardness, whomever speaks exits the stage through the back door, and they enter the stage from the side. That's typically what I've seen. And so when the lieutenant governor exited through the back door, a group of McDaniel supporters were present right by the door, and I believe that they were sort of barking at him that he should debate, right? It's what you saw as well.
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure we got that right.
And there were shouts of coward, why won't you debate?
Why won't you debate, yeah. So, I don't know if that's appropriate or not. I totally realize that challengers always want to debate the incumbent.
Absolutely.
Incumbents never want to debate. That's pretty typical. So we should point out that Donald Trump has made it very clear
he's not debating.
Inside a month to the first Republican presidential debate, he won't debate.
He's not doing it. No.
Says he won't do it at this point. I suspect he holds firm to that. And I'm not defending the lieutenant governor. I'm just saying he's doing what you typically see in incumbents.
Well, in his election, too, what would it benefit him?
And that's why they don't. That's typically why incumbents don't. Now, I maintain at this point, I think we know where the candidates stand, and I think they've both done, probably the challenger's done more to distinguish his positions if he would be elected, that being Senator Chris McDaniel, from the incumbent. The incumbent has focused, it's typical, more on their record.
On his record, absolutely.
Right. And the one grievance I'd make there is I want to see more about what are we going to do in the future. And how would you govern in term 2, Lieutenant Governor, and where do you stand on the issues? And so I did go through those with the senator, so we know, and I'm not sure a debate would make any difference.
You heard plenty from McDaniel saying explicitly he would not be willing to work across the aisle.
He did. No compromise.
No.
And he's been steadfast in that.
Absolutely.
In that philosophy since he ran for U.S. Senate in 2014. No compromise. We compromised too much. I understand that. I don't know that we really are compromising a lot. I think that to those who maybe go a little bit on the moderate approach, I think that's just what they believe is the best policy.
Absolutely.
And more so that is, we just got to give in to the Democrats. I don't see that. But, I can see situations where there may be a give and take where you may have to give up a little bit to get something that's really, really big and important. For example, on a federal basis, I might be willing to grant amnesty or some token, some small student loan forgiveness if we can make the Trump tax cuts permanent, as an example.
Completely understood.
Because they won't compromise on that, and we won't compromise on the other. Okay, so
someone's got to compromise somewhere.
So what's going to happen is the tax cuts are going to expire. That's what's going to happen.
And the lieutenant governor defended his position that the attack on him was that he's given too many positions in leadership to Democrats. And, he kind of had a mathematical approach to that, saying, give me more Republicans and I'll put more Republicans in leadership.
I did ask him that. And honestly, I personally think that that's an issue that's overblown. I know it's easy to make that look like, this is in an effort to compromise, to reach across the aisle, to maybe promote Democrat policy. I don't honestly think that's the case, and I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me, okay, what bills that would be good laws for Mississippi failed to get to the governor's desk simply because we had Democrat chairmen of those committees.
Well, they
Give
found
me the
common
bills.
ground. They both said they'd be willing to eliminate some of these committees. So
I did ask them both.
they
that.
both said
Yeah.
they would be willing to cut some committees.
Which is what we need to do. You can hang around and talk some more.
Absolutely.
We got Caleb Sailors, multimedia journalist with Super Talk Mississippi News in the Element Well Studios. We're visiting with Caleb Sailors, multimedia journalist, Super Talk Mississippi News. So we talked some about, of course, the lieutenant governor's race. What did you see with respect to the attorney general's race?
The attorney general's race surprisingly got a little bit heated on one side. Greta Kemp Martin, who's running on the Democratic ticket for attorney general, really came out swinging in her speech, attacking the current attorney general, Lynn Fitch, basically accusing her of being an empty suit, of not really being there to respond to Mississippians. She criticized the attorney general for kind of taking a step aside in the state's largest public welfare scandal. She called out the attorney general for not responding to calls from our Secretary of State, Michael Watson, regarding Tidelands leasing laws. And she also, this was the really big one to me, and I talked to Miss Martin after she interviewed with you to kind of get her to elaborate on a point she made. She accused the attorney general of falsifying press releases that she's been sending out regarding human trafficking numbers, saying that the attorney general's office is taking credit for work that they didn't do. And she even said a simple Google search will tell you that these numbers don't match up with arrest records, with police reports, etc. That's
interesting. I wonder if that's going to have any effect in the election. I mean, that's a pretty serious allegation.
Very damning allegation.
Records there. I just wonder if that'll fly.
And I asked Greta Kemp Martin about it too. I mean, it looked me in the eye, explicitly told me, yes, you have been given, the media, everybody has been given bad information, and they have been given things that are not true, and the attorney general's office is taking credit for work that they haven't done. Like that, she explicitly told me all of those things. And so, but the attorney general really didn't respond to any of those claims and didn't really acknowledge her opponent's existence at all at the podium, or even when she interviewed with you. She touted some of her achievements as attorney general. Obviously, Roe versus Wade being overturned was one of the big ones. And then talked about the cybersecurity, trying to end robocalls in Mississippi and those things. But she did not acknowledge any of those attacks. And so I reached out to the office, and I'm eager to hear a response from them regarding the human trafficking numbers as well.
Interesting. All right, what about the governor's race? Obviously, that is in focus as well, and then more so with the upcoming. We got the primary course. We got two Republicans that are running against Governor Tate Reeves.
Yes.
On that side, we had both of them on the show yesterday, David Hardigree and Dr. John Witcher. And then, of course, we got the general election coming up. One of those, including Governor Tate Reeves, also on the ballot as a Republican, will advance to the general election. Anything come out of the interviews we had with Dr. Witcher or Mr. Hardigree?
So David Hardigree's speech, he was kind of enraptured in the moment. He talked to me afterwards for a little while and was just enamored with, or he was just caught up in wow, this is really awesome. I got to give a speech at the same place Ronald Reagan once gave a speech in the 1980s, and he was just really grateful to be there. And he talked about hospitals and healthcare in Mississippi, wants to kind of solve the hospital crisis we have at hand. Didn't go super deep into policy, but he was just grateful to be there. Dr. John Witcher took a little turn, and he got the crowd a little riled up a couple of times. He held up a Bible and vowed that he would put a Bible in every single school in Mississippi.
He had it on the set when he came on the show.
And he held it up and giving his speech. And then he put on a red Make America Great Again hat. Was the first endorsement of a presidential candidate for the upcoming election next year.
Yeah. And
he endorsed Donald J. Trump for president in 2024, the first one to do it. And said that's who he's going to support, and if he's elected governor of Mississippi, he would govern similarly to how Trump governs and everything. But then you got to the candidates that are, Brandon Presley's running unopposed on the Democratic side, and politicos, everybody's expecting Governor Tate Reeves to advance past his primary opponents to November, but you had Brandon Presley take the stage and come out swinging. Attacking the governor for corruption, accusing him of being involved in the welfare scandal, accusing the governor of catering to societal elites, only giving special treatment and special interest to those who donate large sums to his campaign and just not being there for the little man or the common Mississippian. And then he accused the governor of ignoring the hospital crisis in Mississippi. Well, the governor came back and he swung back at Presley during his speech, accused Presley of taking money from ex-cons and from having a lot of special interests from other states, taking money from California and New York, and then talked about how Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and Stacey Abrams, who was a governor candidate in Georgia, how they've had vested interest in Presley's campaign and they don't reflect the values of Mississippi, and how Tate Reeves stands on the values, the pro-life values of Mississippi, the conservative values of Mississippi. Meanwhile, he labeled Presley as more of a liberal Democrat who didn't reflect the values of the state. So there was a lot of mudslinging at one another there, a lot of character attacks on one another. But they did get into policy, though. Reeves touted Presley really didn't get into policy as much. He just said he would expand Medicaid and try to solve the hospital crisis. That was really the only policy he elaborated on. He didn't, and he wanted to eliminate the grocery tax and income tax. But other than that, he didn't expound upon policy much. But Reeves touted his record, the lowest unemployment rate in state history, the tax cuts, the largest teacher pay raise. He kind of countered Presley's attacks of him not being there for the common man with saying, well, I've given teachers the highest pay raise they've ever seen in the state. We've improved, fourth grade math and reading scores. That's helped common Mississippians. We've brought in a lot of jobs in the state. That's helped blue collar workers. And so they both had responses for the other, and they both had press conferences too after their respective speeches. And they both kind of expounded upon attacks the others had against each other. But one of the things that stood out to me during the speeches themselves, though, was the supporters getting kind of rowdy. During Presley's speech, his supporters were loud. There were a good number of Brandon Presley supporters there holding up their Later Tater signs, and which was kind of funny, and screaming, and he was getting the crowd riled up. Then they started chanting Brandon. Well, then Tate Reeves' people started yelling Tate, and they kind of drowned out.
They were pretty close to each other too, weren't they?
Well,
they were after the speech.
Yes.
Behind the pavilion.
Yes.
Right
Saw
by signs. Each other. They're 2 feet apart.
Well, and the supporters were really close to each other too.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yes,
yeah.
Even during the speeches, everybody sits in the same area, and you kind of had on the left, if you're facing the podium on the right-hand side, where the Presley supporters were, then kind of the middle and left-hand side were all the Reeves supporters. There were definitely more Tate Reeves supporters in attendance than Brandon Presley supporters, but they got into a couple of screaming matches. At one point, Governor Reeves pointed out a Presley supporter in the crowd and started talking to him, was like, do you have a problem with Mississippi values? Do you have a problem with the achievements we've made in this state? And he's like, see, this is just reflective of the Presley campaign. His supporters don't love us or our values. You usually don't see candidates getting the crowd involved or members of the audience involved in the speech, but the governor did at one point.
It's unusual. I want to say the lieutenant governor engaged some folks in the crowd as well. Well, the people that were yelling at him.
Well, someone asked him if his family were Democrats as well.
That's what it was.
And he was like, let me hear it. But that was about the extent of it. But it was interesting to see the crowd. At points in both of their speeches talking about Presley and Reeves, they both had to stop and take pauses to let the crowds scream.
Wow.
Noticeable pauses too. It wasn't just 2 or 3 seconds. They're 10 to 15 to 20 second pauses just to let the crowds, kind of hash out their differences with one another. But then it kind of calmed down from there, and they gave their speeches, held their press availabilities, and then went on from there.
Yeah. So speaking of crowds, we had Henry Barber, our friend, on.
Absolutely.
Who certainly knows as much about the political landscape in Mississippi and the country maybe as anybody in the state of Mississippi.
He literally ran to come on the show.
He did, and we certainly appreciate that because we had a last-minute cancellation, and he was good enough to come visit with us on the program. But he made the observation that the crowds were smaller than typical for an election year, and how that might affect the candidates. Did you hear him talk about that?
He mentioned that more specifically for the lieutenant governor's race, and he said that boded better for Senator McDaniel.
He sure did.
And I did notice that yesterday during the governor's speech. Every seat in the House was occupied. Usually you see crowds gathering around, and there were
standing room.
There were some, but not as much as you would expect or anticipate in a super heated gubernatorial race.
Yeah, and so he made that observation, which I thought was interesting.
I still thought there were a lot of people there. I thought it was pretty crowded.
It was. So the question is, what's the get out the vote effort look like from these two campaigns? Again, I'm referring to the lieutenant governor's race because I think we have to say in the primary it's the marquee race.
So, I mean, obviously McDaniel's campaign is get out to vote to protect Republican values, to protect our core principles, and the lieutenant governor's campaign is basically saying, hey, we have a good track record with Mississippi. We've gotten a lot done. Come out and vote for us for continued success. And then Reeves and Presley, the governor's, his is let's protect Mississippi values, pro-life values, and Presley's is let's save our hospitals. The governor's not doing anything to help hospitals.
Yeah.
And then that's pretty much their messaging. Secretary of State Michael Watson has his Get Out to Vote initiative, and he's encouraging people, saying that they're safe elections. They've tried to end ballot harvesting, which that's in litigation now. But he's guaranteed that the election machines, the electronic ones, aren't able to be compromised, and they've got a paper trail to verify that every vote counted the way it's supposed to.
Right. Caleb Sailors, multimedia journalist, Super Talk Mississippi News. Thanks for coming on, Caleb.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you for having me.
Coming right back in the Alabama.